Governor Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we just wrapped up the historic impeachment trial of Attorney General Ken Paxton, where you took on a quite different role from your typical
Yes.
duties as Lieutenant Governor and Senate President. Just walk me through what the preparation was for that. And given that you didn't have a law degree, how you prepared for everything and for this really unique position in a very unique trial.
It's the most interesting and most challenging thing I've ever done. And I've being in the media most of my life and in politics, we get a chance to do a lot of interesting things, but this was number one on that list. I was fortunate that, first of all, I had Lana Myers next to me as my legal counsel, former criminal court judge herself, prosecutor, and on the Fifth Court of Appeals. And then my son was a criminal court judge as well as a prosecutor. So he put me through a pretty good boot camp, and Judge Myers was terrific. Then I have three great lawyers on my team. And during the trial, my son told me three things. One is the best judges don't talk too much. Number two, just let both sides lay out their case. And number three, when they start talking over each other, instead of trying to break them apart, just say, look, the court reporter can't record you if you're talking. And so I applied all three of those principles. And then on the motions, probably 70% of the motions I made, I've done 9 sessions now, 18 years in the legislature. So I've listened to a lot of debate. You have a good ear for that. What's germane? What's not germane? What are they saying? It came down to, as lawyers would say, calling the balls and strikes, hearsay, leading the witness, and speculation. Those are pretty easy to handle. And when I was not sure of one, I worked with the judge to get help on that. And then when we really had a complex issue, you saw me turn around and work with my 3 members of my legal team and the judge. And so we worked through it. It's not something I ever want to do again, but it was a very interesting experience.
Speaking of that, you in your remarks right after the verdict said you hope that this never happens again. I imagine most politicians, if I'm being optimistic, would feel that way. Now, in terms of process, there's been criticism of that from the start. Of course, yourself and others have criticized how the House went about this impeachment process. And on the flip side, some opponents have criticized how the Senate trial operated. I'm sure you might have seen this Wall Street Journal editorial board where they wrote, quote, "The fix was in from the start." How are you defending the Senate's portion of the
Well,
trial?
I'm not defending anything. We did a great job. The Wall Street Journal that in the beginning of the trial said Dan Patrick is a fair judge. The same Wall Street Journal that had an editorial 2 weeks before the trial that everyone was going to be convicted easily. The same Wall Street Journal who, when they say the fix is in and there was lobbying for votes, they said probably. They had no basis to write any of that. It's just totally untrue and ludicrous, and I'm not even going to address the Wall Street Journal on that. In terms of the trial, our senators, here's the difference. Our senators got this from the House in May. The first thing we did was go back and look at the history of 1917, the last statewide that was impeached, to see what they did so we could improve upon it and copy the ideas we thought were good ideas. We spent all summer, 90 days, working on this. I issued 240 subpoenas, probably 50 motions and answers to motions and lots of orders. I probably read 1,000 pages or more of history and the law and the documents. There were 800, Monica, 800 exhibits. One exhibit alone was 4,000 pages. You can't see it all, read it all, but we prepared. And then we had 9 days of trial, about 50 hours of testimony, and about 9 hours of deliberations on that Friday before the verdict. So anyone that criticizes that process, well, that's on them, because we did it right. And I think everyone gave me good marks for being fair, and both sides thought I was fair. The House is the problem. And this is what I put in my closing remarks, Monica. And some people say, well, why did you say that then instead of an interview? Because 50 and 100 years from now, no one's going to go back and find this interview or any other interview I've done. They're going to go back and look at the court record. And what I wanted to put on the record, Monica, was clear. The House totally ignored everything that was done in the House on the other 2 statewide impeachments in the 1890s and 1917. Back then, they had basically a trial. Every witness was put under oath. There was cross-examination. The defendant got a chance to address the committee. And then they gave their House members, the 150 House members, weeks to review the evidence. And then they sent volumes of evidence to the Senate. None of that happened, Monica, this time. The House didn't put anyone under oath. There was no cross-examination. And the members had like 2 days notice that they were even voting on it, and really a 4-hour debate. A 4-hour debate. When we spent 3 months preparing and 9 days in trial. So I criticized the House because I wanted that to be in the record. So when the next impeachment happens in 25, 50, 100 years, 150 years, they can go back and look what happened this time, and they'll see that what the House did was not near precedent in the past. And as John Smithy said and Travis Clardy, both lawyers in the House, both of them stood up and opposed it and said, members, this is indefensible. There is no evidence. There's no record to send the Senate. But the Speaker and the House members didn't listen to their own members.
Now, of course, we've heard in response to some of that criticism from Chairman Murr, and even I think the Speaker has mentioned this before, that they said this wouldn't have happened if Paxton would have just come and testified to us about why he needed the $3.3 million for the whistleblower settlements. Do you agree that the Attorney General should have done that, and perhaps it would have avoided this impeachment process?
Look, Monica, you don't impeach someone because they don't come to a regular session hearing. I want you to think about what they're saying. So Paxton and his lawyers, they sent their lawyer to the investigative committee and they wouldn't allow him in. So I don't want to hear that nonsense. What they're talking about was a regular session hearing. And we have people from different agencies that come in and some don't to testify. You don't impeach someone because they didn't come in to a regular hearing. And here's the thing we learned in the trial. We learned a lot of things. And one of the issues, and if they had done it their proper work in the investigation committee, Monica, they would have learned this. It wasn't Ken Paxton who asked for the settlement. It was the whistleblowers. That was in testimony. The whistleblowers were afraid the Supreme Court was going to vote in a certain way that would have stopped them from being able to reclaim damages. So they hurried up. They contacted the Attorney General's office. They selected a mediator, and they came up with a settlement. It wasn't Paxton's idea. And in terms of suing, look, if someone sues the Lieutenant Governor's office, it's the Lieutenant Governor's office that pays, not me individually. Ken Paxton wasn't being sued individually. That was the other thing. It was the Office of Attorney General. And in the state, by the way, we get sued a lot of time. Agencies are automatically able to settle up to $250,000 without approval of the legislature. But if it's more than that, they do. And so that was the request. And it was brought by the whistleblowers. And so that just, it's crazy to think that, oh, he didn't come to a committee, not the investigation committee. I want to be clear, to a regular judiciary committee during session. So we're going to impeach him because of that. That's ridiculous.
Of course, all of the reaction is still pouring in from the verdict. Former President Donald Trump called for Speaker Phelan to resign after the House's process of impeachment. You did, I don't know if you can call it retweeting anymore since X is not Twitter, but
right. I
reposted, re-X'd.
Re-X'd.
Is that an endorsement of that thinking? Do you agree with the former president that Speaker Phelan should resign?
No, I'm not aware that we retweeted what the president said. We may have. I don't know, to be honest with you. Okay. I didn't do it personally. Let me put it that way. If it got retweeted, it wasn't something I did. But the answer to that is what the members say. I don't get involved in speaker politics. I learned a long time ago when I was a senator, a long time ago. You don't get involved in politics over in the House with the speaker. The members are going to have to make this decision. Look, here's what happened, Monica, during this session. The speaker asked them to vote on sports betting, a bill that the majority of Republican voters did not support. And we had no votes for in the House and the Senate. But he forced that on them anyway. I call that a bad vote for them when you're voting against, the majority of your members. Number two, they haven't passed school choice. Strike two. So the members have to go home and say, Speaker didn't give us a chance to vote on school choice. And three, he pushed the impeachment on them. Again, they had no notice, like a couple of days notice. They had 4 hours or 5 hours of testimony in the House, and then they impeached. So they have three issues to go home and face the voters with. And if you heard Governor Abbott this week, he said on school choice, if y'all don't pass it, then the voters will decide in the primary, sounding like Governor Abbott's going to get involved in those races. I say all of that to say this. That's up to the members. Do they think he led them properly or not? If they do, then they'll keep him as speaker. If they don't, then there'll be a change.
in general, there can be some cynicism from Texas voters when it comes to money in politics in general. I want to ask you about the $3 million donation.
Sure, I'm glad you did.
Donation from Defend Texas Liberty. Of course, that is not Paxton's political action committee. They did support him and were sending messages asking voters to call on senators to acquit. So what do you say to voters who have some of that cynicism about money in politics and might ask, why did you take that when you're not up for re-election anytime soon?
So I'll be running again in 2026. I think the last election, I don't know, 25 or $30 million. You can't wait till the last day to raise it. You start raising money, a couple of years in advance. And when we're in session, Monica, we're not allowed to raise money until the last 10 days of June after we're out. And I normally raise about 4, 5, or 6 million during that time. The governor raised 18 million in 10 days this time. So that's a fundraising time after session. What people don't talk about is, yes, I did raise about a little bit more than 6 million. Half of it came from the Defund PAC, but the other half came from people who support TLR. Not from their PAC, but from a lot of the donors who donate to me also donate to TLR, and I don't think they had anything to do with the impeachment, but I want to be clear, but some of their members felt like there should be a trial. Some of their members were also Paxton supporters. But what I'm suggesting is I raised an equal amount of money from both sides, if you look at it, but it was only reported on one side. And, we have to raise money. We'll be back in session in 2025. So you have about a year and a half to raise all the money for 2026. So you raise the money when you can. And no one in the Texas Senate, and I don't believe in the House either, no one who gets a campaign donation, that impacts how they vote on something. There is a certain level of integrity. And I believe, and I just speak for the Senate, it doesn't impact them. Something else that didn't impact them, all the noise on the outside. Because before we went in, Monica, on day one of the trial, I told the senators, number one, how you vote doesn't impact what committee you're on if you're a chairman or your bills get passed. Separate this. Number two, push all the outside noise away. Anything you've read, anything you've seen on television, any emails you're getting, anything being, on Facebook, forget it. The only decision you make, guilty or innocent, convict or acquit, is what is presented in the trial. And in the trial, there was no evidence that they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And you had witnesses, Monica, that were just discredited. I mean, you had one witness that said, one of the whistleblowers, we didn't take any evidence to the FBI. You had another witness that said, well, Paxton sent his aide to give an envelope in the middle of the night in a back alley to Nate Paul. Turned out that wasn't true. And when he was asked about it on the stand, he said, well, several people told me. Well, who told you? Well, I don't know who told me. So when you hear that kind of testimony, you just discount that witness. And then there was another whistleblower who testified that he erased all his text, but someone he texted to didn't, and they showed the text. And in the text, they said, we've got to cook up something to get Paxton, and we got to indict him by the spring. So when you have all that testimony, because the House didn't do their job and didn't do that kind of cross and know everything about it, their case collapsed.
After your post-verdict speech, which I do want for the record, you had a conviction speach and an acquittal speech.
Yes, because I didn't know. I didn't think they would indict based on the evidence that I listened very closely to, of course. I didn't think they would convict on many charges, but I thought maybe one or two, possibly. So I had to be prepared for that. But my speech for that was I would have still said the same thing about the House process.
For the record, as you noted.
It wasn't to criticize the House. It was to put in the record for history so a future legislature, decades in the future, could go back and see what happened and say, well, we don't want to do that again.
And Speaker Phelan, in response to your remarks, said that you, quote unquote, confessed your bias, suggested that it influenced your...
Monica, I'm not even going to address the question. It's ridiculous. No, there was no bias. It was clear. And when the Speaker says that, then he questions my integrity. There is no bias. I ran a fair trial. There was no bias with the members, no matter what outside pressure they were getting. They voted how they believed. And I respect those who voted for conviction, Republican or Democrat, and those who didn't. And he's just very defensive, Monica, right now, because he knows his process is now in the spotlight, and it's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment. As Travis Clardy, House member, a lawyer, said when he was arguing not to impeach, he said, years from now, decades when we're in the Texas cemetery over there from now, there's going to be someone looking at another impeachment, and they're going to say, we don't know how we're going to do it in the House, but we're not going to do like they did it this time. So I don't pay attention to what the Speaker says on that. We could not have been more fair, and and their case was poor, and everybody knows it.
Okay, now to vouchers. Governor Abbott has promised to call you all back in the next couple of weeks to pass a version of an education savings account, also known as school choice.
Yeah.
Do you think that this might be difficult given where the House was during the regular session and now what appears to be on the outside, just further tensions between you and the speaker?
Well, look, tensions between the speaker and myself don't matter. There were tensions between the speaker this session, and we passed the largest property tax cut in history, and many other really significant bills. Politics is tough, and everyone has a different opinion on a bill. And when it comes to those things, yeah, the senators have a view, the House members have a view, the speaker, the governor, myself. I mean, you remember during the property tax debate, the governor was lined up with the speaker, right? And we prevailed in the Senate, but he had a different view. In this time, the governor lines up with us, and the speaker has a different view. These are some of the things you have to work through. I've passed school choice out of the Texas Senate 3 times since I became lieutenant governor in 2014. 3 times. It's never gotten through the House. It's time the Republicans in the Texas, the rural Republicans who are blocking this, stand up and do the right thing. 82% of Republican voters in Texas, that means all the rural districts as well, support school choice. Parents deserve the right to send their child to the school of their choice if they don't think the public school they're in addresses the needs of their child. And historically, looking at all the other states, it's less than 5%, Monica, of parents and students who take advantage of school choice. Why? Because in Texas, most of our schools are pretty good, and the parents are happy, and the kids are happy. They don't want to leave their friends. So most kids and most parents are going to be happy, but there are parents, maybe they have a child with a disability. Maybe their child's getting bullied in the school. Maybe they don't think their school is up to the task if they have a student to get to a higher level. It doesn't matter what the parents think. They have a right to send their child to the school that is best for their child. And it's time the Republicans in the House quit blocking this bill.
You mentioned those rural Republicans who have been against it. I know there was an interim House committee that issued a report a month or so ago with a watered down version of what the Senate was proposing, what the governor likes. Do you see any chance of compromising to sort of get those more hesitant members on board? Or is this going to be something where you stand your ground like the homestead exemptions again?
So the issue on the school choice bill, you always work with both sides to try to come to an agreement. And the truth was, as much as Dade and I were I called him California Dade, and he took a couple of shots at me. Some of this is good natured. Some of it's maybe not so much. It's an elbow here, elbow there. It's part of politics. But at the end, Dade and I came up with a plan that the governor said he'd sign. I mean, he, originally he said he wouldn't. He didn't want the homestead exemption, but the governor finally said, I'll sign what you agreed to. And I'm kind of in that position. I think the senators are. The governor and the speaker have to come to an agreement, because Dade and I can find an agreement, probably, the House and Senate, I think, on school choice. It won't be everything we want. We want full universal, maybe partial of that. I'm not sure what they're going to propose. And we're not going to accept some watered down bill, but it's really up what is the governor willing to sign. If the governor says he's not going to sign it, then the House needs to go back to the drawing board.
Are you under the expectation that teacher pay raises will still be on board?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, I said this in an earlier interview, and I want to be clear to all the teachers watching. I passed in the Senate. I was the leader on the biggest teacher pay raise they've ever had, and that was in the 2019 session. We maintained that, and we also addressed benefits and insurance costs. The teacher unions have opposed every raise we've given teachers in Texas. Every raise. It's never good enough for any teacher unions. And they come up with astronomical numbers that are not possible, that would mean no one would get anything. So the raises that the teachers have gotten, the raises the teachers are going to get, as I believe part of this package, it's the legislature that's going to get it done. The teacher unions are not representing their own teachers. And so we're going to get it done in the special session. You remember in the summer, I added the teacher pay to the property tax bill, and the House didn't like that. They didn't want to do it. So we're gonna do our job, and we'll get a teacher pay raise. My wife was a teacher, my daughter-in-law, my mother-in-law. I did my student teaching. I love teachers. They are the most important person in a child's life outside of the parent, and they deserve to be paid as professionals and not just it's another job, because it's not just another job.
All right, Governor, I am definitely over 15 minutes,
All right.
so my apologies to Stephen, but thank you so much for your time.